I'm going to kick off. So, welcome everyone for coming this afternoon. This is Digital Futures for Good, episode 8, and we're going to be talking about Keir Starmer and his government, so not by himself, his first 100 days. Um, Digital Futures for Good was an idea that brewed over the Christmas holidays last year. And in particular, expecting an autumn general election, we thought, let's get some thought leaders in front of a camera and let's record what they think a new government should do for digital inclusion. So we managed to get some episodes in before the general election, and we've had one since the general election. And one thing that I asked everybody when I was interviewing them was what would they do in their first 100 days to help to fix the digital divide. And so for this episode, we thought it would be good to look back on what some of those interviewees said about their first 100 days and to examine it. And I have a special guest with me to help me do that. So Liz, thanks so much for joining this afternoon. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Helen. Yeah, I'm Liz Williams. I spent my career working at the intersection of business and society, largely specializing in the human impacts of digital transformation and being really clear about the need for everybody to be digitally empowered as the world marches on. Today, I wear a number of hats, but today I'm wearing one of my favorite hats, which is as chair of Good Things Foundation. But my day job is I'm chief executive of Future.now, and we're a business coalition that's working to unblock the digital skills pipeline amongst working age adults and making sure that everybody that's in the working population and that should be in the working population has got those essential digital skills that they need for work. And of course, all of that is a continuum. So it's lovely being able to be part of the good things journey, because frankly, if you haven't got the foundation skills and you haven't got the skills for life, then you're very unlikely to have the skills for work. So it all comes together beautifully.
Fantastic, fantastic, Liz. And I think you'll be bringing all of your hats to this afternoon's conversation. That's
And
fantastic.
maybe a sombrero.
A tin hat, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Um, so to kick off, we thought we would play a little montage of some of the Digital Futures for Goods interviewees answering the question, what would you do in your first 100 days to tackle digital exclusion? So the team will now play that montage. So just imagine, suspend disbelief that you're elected Prime Minister. What would you do for digital inclusion in your first 100 days?
Gosh, well, I think I would call my cabinet together and say this is going to be one of our top priorities, because without sorting this problem, we can't do all the other things that we're trying to do in terms of the economy, in terms of health services, etc. I mean, so they would be clear about what we do, what our mission was. And then I think I'd also possibly call a round table of business leaders, because I think they need to be involved, and they need to know that I was, as Prime Minister, was going to say to them, look, we've all got to step up here. You've got the skills as well, so let's try to work in partnership. That's two things. And obviously, I would set up a delivery unit. 3 things in 100 days. That's quite a lot. I hope I would start, at least to begin the process.
The first thing you have to do is show that this is a real priority. So you need to convene something, you need to speak publicly, personally as the Prime Minister, to show why this is an issue that connects with the rest of your platform that you're personally going to be committed to. First thing. You then need to back that up with some actions. So you need to appoint a team. That team needs to report to you pretty regularly. And that team needs to know that you've got their back, and that you will back them up when they reach the inevitable blockages and problems and challenges. And then you need to give them permission to try some stuff and to get on with it. Those are the 3 things I do in the first 100 days.
So absolutely invest more in infrastructure and accessibility, maybe by subsidizing access to devices. Second, rethink education wholesale. That's a big one.
Yeah.
We have to rethink pedagogy itself. If you're seeing these frontier models, and again, we're only at the very beginning, which on already any standardized test relating to human intelligence or reasoning already outperform or do better than humans. So rethinking kind of, well, what should education look like? And should we judge children just on standardized testing? Yeah. It's more about how can we, going back to that mindset, how can we develop the next generation in a way that they're resilient, that they're flexible, that they have I think the people who are going to do really well are those who are more able to deal with change and who are entrepreneurial. So fostering that from the youngest age. And then finally, as a business owner, there needs to be more in terms of R&D and tax credits and benefits for those who want to invest and build and bring in the right team to develop these technologies, and for industry and government and community to work together because it's interdisciplinary.
Well, I wouldn't have thought it will surprise you to say the first thing my government would be doing would be putting in place an essentials guarantee. And because digital connectivity, internet access is one of those essentials, by setting in legislation that there's a level at which universal credit will be set that covers those essentials, we'd be ensuring that people were able to access the internet. I think then when we look beyond that, after the first few days, I'll be looking to tackle those wider issues around people having a secure place to live. And I think with also being able to afford internet access, you'd be able to have a secure place to live with digital connectivity in your home. But also about ensuring people can access the right advice and support, which you talked about so well there, about supporting people to get an understanding of what they're eligible for, what they're entitled to just walk with people through some of the complexities of accessing support is really important. So I think that combination of sufficiency, of people being able to afford the essentials, that wraparound support, and ensuring people have secure, safe homes in which to live and flourish.
Well, I think just that gives us a taste of how good those conversations have been, and I'm hoping that part of what we do today is to push all of you back to listen to those. I think I'm very interested in doing that as well. So we heard at the top was Baronesses Anna Healy and then Baroness Dido Harding, who were both part of the House of Lords Digital and Communications Committee that did that deep dive into digital exclusion as part of the House of Lords. One's Labour, one's Conservative. Then we heard Nina Schick, who's an AI thought leader, coming at this from quite a different point of view. And then lastly, that was Emma Reevey, who's the chief exec of Trussell Trust, the food bank charity. Liz, I'm sure you took some notes, but let's go on to listen to Martha Lane Fox and then have a little chat. So Martha Lane Fox, obviously, entrepreneur, chancellor of the Open University, set up lastminute.com, absolutely one of those .com visionaries from the early 90s, and was also the digital inclusion champion for a short while before she became the digital champion about a decade ago. So let's hear from Martha what she said about her first 100 days.
So Martha, I always ask the same last question, which is suspend disbelief. If you were in the general election and found yourself as Prime Minister, the next Prime Minister... It's
not much of a suspension of disbelief. This is what I amuse myself with when I can't sleep, which is quite frequently. I'm like, what would I do if I was Prime Minister lying in bed?
Oh, fantastic. So maybe you've prepared this one.
No, I don't get very far. I normally just end up laughing.
So imagine you're the Prime Minister. What would you do in the first 100 days to fix the digital divide?
Again, I'm not going to say anything that is kind of big new news. I think that the first thing, especially knowing a little bit about how Prime Ministers operate and what the powers are that they have, you just have to make it your own personal priority. And I would make it a personal priority to build not just the best startups in the world, to be the most AI safety place and all the platitudes that come out of ministers for the last 15, 20 years about technology, but actually have a detailed plan about what a modern Britain looks like. That's the most important thing. I think the Prime Ministers can do a bunch of stuff, probably less than some people imagine, but the thing they can do is keep a priority top of mind of their cabinet. We are building a modern Britain, and that means using the tools of the modern age to make sure no one is left behind, that we have put modern technologies at the heart of how we imagine the state, and we are doing it in a really detailed and joined up way, and that is what I would aspire to do.
Wow. So I think both Anna Healy, Dada Harding, and now Martha, Liz, coming to you, is that talked about the government, or in more specifically, the Prime Minister making it a priority. So thinking about the new Labour government and the new Labour Prime Minister, how do you think they're doing on prioritising digital inclusion?
I've heard more about it in the last, it's more than 100 days now, but in the last 100 days than I have previously. So I feel encouraged that, certainly every time I've heard the Secretary of State for DSET, Peter Kyle, talk, he's absolutely anchored it in digital inclusion. Now that is a step change to where we were in the previous administration. And what Martha said there about, making it a priority and modern Britain, and it not just being about startups and unicorns. It reminded me of the conversation that I had as I joined the Digital Skills Council under the last administration, which was absolutely initially just focused on, how do we build the future tech giants, and what does that need to look like, with no, engagement around digital inclusion. So, it's early days. The language feels good. Does it follow through? But on the question of prime ministerial leadership, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. So Chris Bryant, who's the minister in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, who is responsible for digital inclusion, and I have said this many times, but I'm thrilled that he even has one whole bullet point for digital inclusion. It's not just part.
Absolutely.
Said he launched Get Online Week at the House of Lords last Monday.
Which in and of itself was a major change.
Exactly. And what he said was digital inclusion isn't just a priority for him and for the government, it's a passion. And the one thing I've reflected on, having asked all these people about their first 100 days, is that 100 days isn't really that long, especially when you've been out of government for 14 years, when you've got lots of new MPs who didn't even have offices, that they need to set up offices and set up teams, and some of them tried to have a little bit of a break in the summer. So that it's not a long time to expect things. But as you said, Peter Kyle, Chris Bryant, they're talking about digital inclusion in a way that absolutely was not there before. The other thing that Chris Bryant said last week, which I thought was so true, was that it must feel for people like us working in digital inclusion like we've been in a desert and someone's now given us a glass of water. And I think that's a really helpful analogy, because I think it's about, and I think his point was, we've now got a glass of water, but we actually want to have a well, and we want to have a whole water system. So it's about how do we take that priority, that passion, into the actions that we need, and then into the sustainable strategy. One thing, Liz, that you were involved in, as with your Future.now hat on, is that, and some people on the call today, them or their organisations came along. We had 4 roundtables in August. So officials at DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, asked Good Things Foundation to convene, to host and to chair these 4 roundtables with these 4 pillars. So around access, skills, digital services, and then engagement and confidence. And that was fascinating. And I think probably 80 to 100 organizations were consulted. And I think one thing that, again, feels quite different is that we've got ministers who are asking their officials to go and to listen, to consult and to talk. So what did you, obviously it was back in August now, but you were a part of those roundtables. How did you find those conversations?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I was encouraged that we were actually having the conversations. And, I think, I think Martha talked about the role that, government can play. And actually, a lot of it is about convening others around it and having ambitious priorities. But I think if you can start by listening, it's not that people don't know what needs to happen. And there was certainly a lot of consensus coming through at the two of the roundtables that I attended. I think they've given the government some very clear steers. And I think to your point, 100 days isn't very long. I would rather they listen and then act decisively rather than come in with some half-baked, we think we understand, but not having properly engaged with those that do understand, that have been sitting at the coalface for a very long time, to quote the minister, gasping for that bit of water. But, and we do want a well, that's for sure. But this isn't just government's problem to solve, but government absolutely, as we heard from both of the baronesses and we heard from Martha, they have a real opportunity in terms of being clear on that ambition and helping bring business and others around it. They don't have to find all the answers, but they have to ask the right questions and they have to set up the stall appropriately.
Yeah, brilliant. I want to come back. Let's listen to the next film in a moment, but I want to come back maybe at the end about Martha's concept of a plan for a modern Britain, because I do actually think that's probably pretty fundamental to what we want to see moving forward. But so Andy Burnham, obviously the Mayor of Greater Manchester, very well known, and before that he had been an MP and he'd been a government minister. So it's great that I sat down with Andy. So all of these conversations, apart from the one with Nina Schick, happened before the general election. So that these people are all talking, not with the benefit of hindsight, but with looking to a future. So let's listen to Andy Burnham's 100 Days.
So imagine that you became the Prime Minister in Westminster, and what would you be doing in your first 100 days to fix the digital divide in all of its gamut?
Well, I'd be obviously taking the Greater Manchester plan and the Greater Manchester vision in. I think it's about a vision for the country first, though, isn't it? In terms of, what should be the right of every citizen. I think you've got to start there. I've been in this role now 7 years, and what I observe is the basics of life, and this might be difficult for some to hear in the industry, but the basics of life were basically broken up and sold off. Now, in the telecoms world, you can argue there was more logic in that because, it's created a very competitive industry. But if I look at the water world, well, has that improved the service to our residents and lowered their bills? Well, no. In energy, has it done that? No. Did it do it in public transport? Definitely not. Deregulation led to the opposite. And the way I look at it is you won't succeed as a country if your individual citizens are not set up to succeed. It's why I've adopted the housing first philosophy from Finland. You can't have anything in life without a good home. Yeah. By a good home, I would say a good home in terms of its physical condition, a secure home in terms of your tenancy. But now it's got to be a connected home, hasn't it? To everything around you and the opportunity. You've got to have, I think, electricity and energy you can afford, as opposed to sort of be choosing between eating and heating and all of those type of discussions. Water systems that don't pollute your local streams and all of that. I do honestly think we have to sort of rethink these things. And this is slightly political territory, but I'm a politician, and I'm if you like, well into my career now, and I just feel the need to say this. I think we took several wrong turns in the 1980s. The government I was in didn't correct it. You can't have millions of your fellow citizens living life without the foundations of the basics and not expect there to be problems. There will be issues, won't there? We won't be thriving as a country and as an economy. So you've asked me a question. I would personally move towards an approach that gives people the right to a good, secure home. That therefore then has to be provided the right to food every day, so that there's no worry about that. And I applaud Sadiq with some of the things he's done in that space. The right to you know, having warmth within your home, but also connectivity is a right. I would say you can't be what you can be, can you, unless you are connected to opportunity, and you know that implies to transport that connectivity piece as well as digital. So the way I see it, and this is my kind of final point, I think we're almost, the way we've run things, we've almost set people up to fail, and particularly through the way the benefit system interacts with this complex world. I would say come at it, you know, the learning from devolution is when you're working bottom up with your communities, you just look at life through a very different lens. And it's about making sure everyone's got the basics in place, and then you've got a foundation for them to succeed, and the whole economy and the whole country to succeed.
Fantastic listening to Andy there. I mean, some of his political things there were pretty radical, but it was interesting, Liz, what he was saying about the right, almost like a human right to a connection that is, I mean, obviously he talked about it as being part of a right to a good home, a secure home, but also very much that foundation of the basics. And one of the things that the Labour Party, the Labour government, I should say, is talking about is that fixing the foundations. Obviously, digital inclusion is part of those foundations, is it not?
It is, absolutely. And I mean, it was interesting listening to Baroness Healy at the outset. She talked about why she felt this should be a top priority, and it was because of the intersectionality with other things. And that plays into exactly the point that Andy's making there. I suppose the thing that frustrates me is that often I think people have just not appreciated the complete transformation that we've had in terms of how we do things, you know, how you live your life, what you can do if you're not online, you know, how that all comes together. But also when you start to think about skills and digital is skills is a big topic, digital is a big topic. But for some reason we treat digital skills completely differently. And there has been an assumption that we can go through this revolution that we've been through and people will just acquire the skills through osmosis by the most part, or candidly, it's an issue that will self-resolve over time because the perception is it's about the older generation. And I think we're moving beyond that now. I think people are starting to understand, no, hang on, you know, we have to invest in people. We have to bring people up to where they need to be, and we need to stop building for the digital society we aspire to be. We need to actually go to where people are, which is a different way of looking at what Andy's talking about, but takes you to the same place. So I mean, for me, you know, I do agree with Andy that you have to go bottom up, but you also have to come top down, which is why that ambition thing remains really important, because if you don't know where you're going, you can't find the path to get there.
Yeah, that's right. I think that one thing that I'm actually very optimistic about is that the way in which I think some of the new MPs, but also that ministers as well, talk about digital and technology is with an understanding. Maybe it's generational. Maybe it's because some of them have actually had a completely different job in the real world, not politicians 6 months ago. But they're bringing an understanding that digital is just part of most people's lives. And therefore, excluding people from that is a fundamental thing that will hold the nation back. So I think that I'm optimistic that actually there's an understanding in Parliament that maybe wasn't there before with some of the it's not just about age. I think it's about experience, and I think it's to do with if people had been politicians for a long time, some of those that have stood down, it's actually their experience was managing policy, right? Not managing technology.
I think you're right. Just on that, I think, I can remember you and I having conversations when the pandemic hit about this being the moment when digital inclusion will be understood differently, which, you know, that is a long way from what actually happened. But actually, I think there is something about that legacy of COVID, in that people do start to realise that you're only as strong as the weakest link. And like you, I am optimistic about this new cohort of MPs that are coming in with their different attitudes to kind of the past precedents, and they're filming what's happening in Parliament as they're walking along and explaining and doing things like that for their constituents, but also realising that not every constituent has got access, and that they're part of that. So, like you, I remain optimistically hopeful.
Yeah. I think one thing that, I mean, particularly, because obviously we're focusing on this, on the first 100 days here, is I think one thing which is interesting about that is about pace of change, right? And I do think that sometimes, and you'll be surprised that I'm saying this, pace is the enemy of great. And so that I absolutely am an optimist and trusting. So I trust that mission-led government means that it's about missions, joining up. It's about making sure that those foundations are fixed and that the priorities are heeded. But actually, I do also get a slight sense that some of the ministers are sort of getting into their silos because that's their day job. It's a huge day job. Like, don't get me wrong. There's an absolute massive, massive agenda that each one of those secretaries of states have. And therefore, getting on with it might be the enemy of actually creating a proper sustainable strategy. So the reason why I still feel optimistic is because I think it's both and. I think it's getting on with doing some of the things that is obvious, but also thinking about the long term.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's, this idea of mission-led government, it's new, isn't it? And they're working out how to do that. But certainly, all the conversations I'm hearing is about that relationship between, you can't fix the NHS unless you bring people up digitally. You can't deliver some of those changes. And, I suppose the other way to think about this 100 days, and, I'm not a massive fan on it, but it does act as a good way of thinking of where you've got to or where you're trying to get to as a bit of a poker. But, the other way to think about it is, if it was their secondary school period, they'd only be just finishing their first term and they've got to get all the way through to their GCSEs. Now, people can't wait on some of that stuff, but you're going to grow into it over time. So it goes back to that thing about what's the ambition that you're trying to get to, and the plans will start to come through in time. But, you also need to make sure that you're doing enough that people continue to believe, and the optimism doesn't start to turn to cynicism.
Absolutely. Yeah, quite a lot of people are asking me, so Helen, is it real or is it just warm words? And I keep saying, I think it's real. I think it's real. So Andy Burnham, you mentioned intersectionality. Let's come back to that, but let's have our final. We're having two videos here because I spoke to Sam Shah and Manal Bakai for the healthcare and digital inclusion episode. So we're going to hear from Sam and then we're going to hear from Manal, and then I'll come back to you, Liz.
In my first 100 days as Prime Minister, I would put health at the centre of my policy. I would create shared outcomes and set a really ambitious target, similar to the net zero target, multi-year, that we hold all cross-government departments, multi-agency industry sectors to account for. And then I would be using that as a lever to accelerate the fantastic work that's already happening on the ground from organisations like the Good Things Foundation to really drive change and listen to those local communities, what they need, what matters most to them, and then unblock those barriers to scale and spread that change.
So, in my first 100 days as Prime Minister, I would appoint a Minister for Digital Inequalities in order to address the digital divide and to solve that over a 5-year term. Invest in a major programme that spans government departments, that tackles everything from health, education, employment, and incentives to business, research and innovation. So by the end of those 5 years, we have economic benefit, a reduction in health inequalities, and improved outcomes across society.
Wow, very succinct. So sorry, it was Manal and then Sam. But I think this is actually really good for me to reflect on all these amazing conversations I've had during the year to date. And that both of them very much understanding that cross-government underpinning. So actually, I said we'd come back to talk about intersectionality, but I think it's great that two people at senior level working in the health sector really understand how digital inequalities drive poor health. Manal obviously said that she put health as a priority. I think she's probably be delighted there. I think definitely the Prime Minister and the government always continuously talking about health being a priority. And actually today is the launch of the consultation process for the 10-year plan. So I think that that shows how that short-term, long-term is working.
Yeah.
So yeah, Liz, I mean, obviously Minal and Sam talked about a number of things there. So do you want to talk a little bit about intersectionality or about healthcare?
I was going to talk about net zero.
Oh, please do.
Do you mind? Yeah. No, because I feel like Manal and I are almost like kindred spirits on this, because when you look at the focus that's been given on the climate, actually net zero was a really clear part of that, and that was about setting a very ambitious target. And if you went back 10 years, actually most organizations, they weren't on those pages at all. So net zero acts as that convening, that coordination, that North Star that people have then walked towards. And then, building on from that, as somebody that's worked in business and particularly in corporate responsibility or purpose, however it's evolved now, actually when I listened to what Sam was saying about a minister for digital inequality, it was reminding me that within business, if you went back 10 years ago, actually it was the corporate responsibility director that was responsible for all of this activity, and it kind of sat in a doing good team. And whereas now within business, there's much more of a focus, particularly in large organizations, on purpose, and it's embedded. And of course, you do have the reporting side of it, but actually it's much more everybody's job. And I think that takes us back to the kind of, how do you make change happen? You make change happen by setting clear goals that mean that everybody can then come around it and bring their best to it. So it's intersectionality coming at it from a slightly different thing. It's about whose job is it, who's responsible for it. We all are, but we all know what we're getting towards, and we understand that it matters as much for housing as it does for health, as it does for good jobs, as it matters for the economy. So that's a kind of maybe a slightly different way of thinking about the intersectionality conversation here.
Yeah, definitely. I think well, one question back, Liz, do you think that having a single measure, and I'm not sure that's exactly what you said, but do you think we could achieve it? So let's not, what I mean is, like, pragmatically, do you think that there is a way of having a single measure that businesses and government, etc., could get behind on the social impact, or maybe more narrowly on digital inclusion?
Yeah, well, I think it has to be possible. And certainly with my day job hat at Future.now, I've been calling for that. I've been calling for a great digital catch up for working age adults. And I'm saying the UK needs a national ambition for essential digital capability. So everybody, on the skills side, if we're being just very simplistic about it, could turn around and say, we've got a framework, it sets out some skills. Why wouldn't we want everybody to have those skills that are in the essential digital skills framework? All of us can then work out how we make that happen, but that's about getting everybody in the UK up to that floor, and then we raise the floor and we raise the floor. So yeah, I think it's possible. I think you might have to have a number of things to start with, because it's not just about skills, it's about access, it's about connectivity. We know the kind of bits that sit around digital inclusion, but I think the other thing is how you're anchoring digital inclusion. Digital is how we live. It's fundamental to everything else. So I also believe it's fundamental to net zero. I get excited when people talk to me about green jobs. I say you can't have green jobs without digital transformation. You're not going to deliver half of this.
That's right. Let's talk a little bit about businesses. So Sam Shah there said about incentives for business. Nina Schick mentioned credits about actually skills for teams. I think Anna Healy talked about pulling together business leaders. In fact, I think they probably all talked about this not being just government's role or just businesses' role. This is really about cross-sector. Do you think, obviously at Good Things Foundation, we've been massively supported through our strategic partners, Vodafone, Virgin Media, O2, Accenture, and Nominate, and they've actually helped us film Digital Futures for Good, by the way. But do you think I guess it's partly about businesses I want to ask you about, but also maybe about government doing more around convening? Do you think that is government's role?
Well, undoubtedly that's government's role to convene, but I think with direction, but having listened, you don't just go and create the direction, but you've only got to look at things like the skills and growth levy. There is money sitting there. Nothing that business does is without cost. So and you can't just rely on organizations like those that are supporting Good Things Foundation, who are, undoubtedly amongst the most enlightened that are out there, and a huge thank you to them for for enabling Good Things to do the things that they do. But we need more. So, if we want businesses to really step up consistently, we have to provide the incentives to help them do it. So it frustrates me that we've got money sitting there in the apprenticeship levy that isn't spent. Why aren't we using that skills and growth levy in the new language to enable business to pump prime action? And that doesn't mean, from a skills point of view, providing long courses. I mean, you highlighted some brilliant facts and stats about how successful some of the DFE sponsored courses are for driving change. And the simple answer is they're not where people are. But business could probably do more if that money was released to them to provide bite-sized learning.
Yeah. I mean,
and on that, Helen, I think also the other side to that is, going back to what Anna Healy said about, maybe I'd convene business leaders, and that, you don't just want it to always be the same business leaders. And by the way, it shouldn't be the tech companies, because, this is about every industry. It's not just about technology. But actually, if you set a goal and then invite people to come around it, they come up with innovative, different ideas, and there's no barriers there to good ideas. So actually, you'd want to really open that up, and that's where the convening power really comes from government.
I think that's right. I think, though, I would also, I am calling for, Good Things is calling for an action plan, but also a strategy for digital inclusion. So I think that I'm not a massive fan of 1,000 flowers blooming in that if it doesn't lead to the change that we want to see. So, when we talk about intersectionality, what we mean is that digital inclusion isn't just about giving people skills and devices and connectivity. Digital inclusion is about including people. I think that someone said that no one's left behind, maybe it was Martha, is that a modern world that leaves no one behind. And so actually that they are the tools, if you like, to remove the barriers. But then it's like, what do you then do once you're online?
Yeah, and that's definitely right, Helen. And I mean, the other side to that is you've only got to look at the work you've been doing around AI skills. Nobody left behind. Frankly, technology will keep moving. So there's always going to be a job to do. And how you make sure that you start to build that into the DNA of our society is absolutely where I see Good Things and others really leading that charge.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone, if you have any questions or comments, please put those in the chat panel. Welcome to Despina, who's here from Australia, who's been following the work of Good Things Foundation in Australia and is here to listen to us too, which is fantastic.
Helen, we should also say, rather than just get, we love questions, but actually, if anyone's got the answers as well, that would be even better, wouldn't it? What would be your solutions, and what do you think of the first 100 days? We'd love to know that, I think, as well.
Definitely. One thing that I thought I would pick up on, and it's a little bit about what Andy was saying about welfare. So I was quite surprised, and also Emma Reevey talking about the essentials guarantee, which is making sure that everybody has, what Emma Reevey sufficiency, which doesn't sound very ambitious, but actually it means people who have their life is insufficient, like the insufficiency of food and connectivity, etc. And that one area that I do find very interesting, and actually overlaps with your work at Future.now a bit, is that and my next guest on Digital Futures for Good is Alan Milburn. So
very good.
Yes, has done some great work and is advising the government now. But he led a commission in Barnsley, in South Yorkshire. I'm in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, in Barnsley, where they looked at pathways to employment, and they specifically drilled down on people who are economically inactive. So on the whole, this is people who have some disability, maybe a long-term health condition, but it includes people who are not on benefits, who aren't working. And And in Barnsley, they interviewed a significant number of people who are economically inactive, and 70% of them said they would like to work. And then there was research in that commission from the Learning and Work Institute that said that if we moved from where we are currently at 78% economically active to 80%, that 2% shift would bring £23 billion a year into our economy. So obviously all of the, the synapses in my brain started firing. So what we have here is something that's very good for people, is very good for communities, but also good for the economy. So actually, if we could bring together some of that, and why am I talking about this from a digital inclusion point of view? Because those people are highly likely to be digitally excluded, both from an affordability point of view, but may well be from a skills point of view. And then actually what they were saying in the report, so the Pathways to Employment report, was that actually they would like flexible work and they would like part-time work. And actually that's what technology really brings people. My dining room, I'm talking to all of you, so that it then actually becomes the platform potentially to work. But there's a whole bunch of things there. And just to bring it back to what Andy Burnham said in the interview, not in the clip we showed, he actually said that he would like to have welfare devolved, so that he could make sure that welfare works for building the pathways for every individual to the next step to help them back into work or to help them to participate, rather than being all around conditionality and kind of conditions of the money you get from the state, as opposed to what the help you need and what the barriers are that are removed. I just wanted to, promote the next, because I'll be talking to Alan Milburn, but I'm fascinated about, and I also wanted to show this as being a worked example, if you like, of what intersectionality means. So actually, this is about people who want to work, who currently can't work, and actually for whom digital tools might be the way in which that helps them to to work on a health condition using digital tools, but also a way of helping them get back into work and for themselves. Let's focus on them as individual people having better lives, and then the knock-on effect is that's good for the economy.
But it's quite a sophisticated way of thinking about it, and I think traditionally that's not where the digital inclusion or the digital inequality argument has been. It has been, very much about centered on this is an older person's problem, whereas actually, no, we now live in a very different world where if you don't have digital, to use this government's kind of language, opportunities for all will be limited. And exactly to your point, the knock-on impact from a economic perspective is quite significant. So, when I suppose the other side of when we're talking about this government as well, and obviously everything they're doing at the moment is kind of underlined by the budget conversation about there isn't money there. But actually, I think on this topic, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do things differently that removes some of the cost of failure money and just channel it differently. Now, some of that requires bravery to make those first steps, but I think it's really encouraging what Alan Milburn's done there, and it'll be interesting to see exactly what he's recommending and what that could look like.
Well, part of what he's recommending is better joining up at the community level. So actually, instead of 100 different organisations and community organisations, charities, DWP, the council, all providing disparate, incoherent, unjoined up support, actually making that a lot more coherent at that local level and having navigators who are assigned to help people. I think
which really pulls into actually one of the comments that's there. I'm sorry, is it Madupi? Is that how you say it? But I mean, I think, your point about intergenerational pathways exactly is playing to what you're saying there. But I'd also challenge on that one and say people assume that, that one of my absolute, detest terms is this kind of digital native story, because it's just not true. Actually, people can do the things that they're taught to do and they'll often, young people may be very good at some things, but very poor at others. So I think we just need to make sure that that's why I'm really keen on kind of lifting the floor in a structured way around skills in particular. But I think the more we can have those conversations running intergenerationally, I think that we start to build confidence. And I think digital confidence is something that should become very common parlance.
Yeah, and actually, I think Modupe, hopefully I've pronounced that properly. Your comment in the chat about intergenerational is actually also about empowering and encouraging students. And I think part of that is to also hold the mirror up to say, so how do you feel about your digital skills? And that is the gamut, because sometimes that's about because we know that actually younger people are much more likely to have risky behavior. We know that the biggest platform for fraud online is Facebook Marketplace. And people buying things on Instagram that don't exist. So actually the understanding across the piece what your own skills are and how you could improve those, as well as helping others. So Despina from Australia, thank you so much for your comment. Doing nothing or not enough is the real cost of failure. The return on investment for impact is how things should be measured. I think that's great. So in the UK, we have the Centre for Economic and Business Research says that the return on investment is £9.48 precisely for every pound invested. So I think that is significant. I think my take on just coming back to the kind of intersectionality piece, yeah, and Gwyneth says that the older generation might not be on TikTok, but are possibly better at filling out a tax return and maybe also thinking about what the answer to the question should be, rather than just having the skills to fill the form in. But absolutely, doing nothing is not a solution. And I do get the sense that the Labour government, different departments are talking to us about digital inclusion, and I find that incredibly encouraging.
And I mean, I'm having conversations on this thing about impact measurement. Obviously, Good Things Foundation, you're a charity, but you've absolutely led the charge on measuring that economic impact. But Future.now, we've been really highlighting there's a big gap on the economic impact in the working population, and we're working with DSA on how we might close that over the next few months. Well, that for me is very encouraging, because previously nobody's really even wanted to have that conversation with us about it. So it's a bit of jam tomorrow though on some of this, isn't it? So but it's good. The conversations are moving in the right direction.
I think the problem with your jam tomorrow metaphor is that in Alice in Wonderland, that means the jam never comes, right? It's coming tomorrow. I would like to think that some strategic reflection, some listening, some conversations, which is what I think is happening, is going to lead to a coherent, coordinated, sustainable strategic plan for fixing the digital divide. But I am an optimist, so I think that 100 days is too soon to say that they're not going to do what they say they're going to do. And even that language they, that I think is that it should be we all together is going to do it. But I think we definitely have lacked any kind of leadership from the previous government.
But I think just going back to when you were talking about the roundtables that happened over the summer, and apologies to those people that weren't aware of those, but they were a really good piece of work, and maybe that's part of. Well, hopefully that is part of the we, because there was some very clear, recommendations coming from those that will, enable the government, to then take that convening and that role of then bringing people around. Well, how do we get this turbocharged? So, that the fact that they wanted to move at pace with those roundtables, I find that very encouraging.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the way I was talking previously about the people who are economically inactive, not a lovely term, but hopefully people understand what that means, is that, and you said that's a sophisticated way of thinking, is that actually I feel very able to have that type of conversation with the new Labour government, because I believe that they want to be mission led. I believe that they do want to fix the digital divide, not just around the edges.
Yeah.
And that is quite different to the conversations before, where it's like, let's do one thing, I mean, and
let's grow more unicorns. No, you can't have your unicorns. They are mythical creatures. Actually, if you really want to get to economic growth, then this is genuinely an opportunity to mission, economic growth through opportunities for all. I absolutely believe in that. And as you say, the conversations I've been having are much more strategic than they've ever been in the past.
Absolutely. And I think, Despina, it's great to have somebody here from another country, because I think that it helps me to reflect on what I think we are doing well, and that I think part of the punchline for today, Liz, is 100 days isn't very long, but we're still feeling optimistic. But is that we actually have a Labour government who have these 5 missions, and Liz, as you've rightly said, one of them is opportunities for all, and that of course would drive economic growth, but actually it also is going to drive individual opportunities.
Personal prosperity.
Young people, adults, all citizens, all people in this country to have, and elsewhere, to have those opportunities across the piece, and that digital is a fundamental part of that. So Anne's just from Links Digital. Hi Anne, thanks for all the work that you hopefully had a good Get Online week last week. Absolutely, I think that is a really good thing that you've just written there, and actually very topical for today. Hopefully you can feed that into the NHS 10-year plan consultation. So very much about, if someone has got a mobile phone number, then they have a smartphone and they can use it, that they're sent links. They might have links, or they might not have. So she was saying that an appointment for urgent blood tests had fell through the gaps. So and also,
I think with that one, Helen, it's a good example of people making assumptions that because they can do something, other people can do it. And if you're the person that's responsible for the user experience, you need to come back to, the real basics. And I always say, let's just talk about some of the real numbers there. I mean, Helen, you and I were at the AI Summit, and we did a session on the stage, and I think I felt a little bit sorry actually for all these AI people that were there going, it's really great, we're all living on the AI world. And then Helen and I went, do you realize the reality of the world, and how many people are not online in the UK, and how many people haven't got smartphones, and how many people are in work but don't actually have the basic digital skills? And we were quite surprised afterwards by actually probably we weren't really that surprised by how many people came up to us and said that was new information to us. And you kind of go, well, you need to know where people are, and if you don't know where people are, your interventions are not going to be as successful. And by the way, AI is not going to take away this problem, because if people don't understand and have the kind of digital literacy to be able to understand what's going on and interpret it, then we're just building on grains of sand. So I love that example. Well, I really hate that example, Anne, but it's a great example.
Yeah, it's also that digital exclusion isn't binary. It's not like you are or you're not. It's like you may be able to I'm going to say something that sounds silly, like chat with your friends on WhatsApp video chat one day, but it doesn't mean the next day you can actually make sure you don't miss your appointment with the blood test. And you turned your video on. Did you briefly want to join the conversation?
No, sorry, I was on the phone while I was listening to you at the same time. No, it is very interesting, but I think every time we've got to come back to grassroots. In Good Things Foundation, we are dealing with the most further away from digital. So, and every time we've got to remember that it's grassroots first, build the foundation. You don't put the roof on until you've got the foundation in, do you?
It's 100%. Problem is we've got some people who've got really strong roofs, and often the people who've got the strongest roofs are the ones that are then trying to decide what the answers are for the people that are sitting there amongst the sand. That's a terrible analogy, Anne, but I think we're in the same place.
Yeah, I think, Liz, some people are living in palaces when other people don't have a roof over their head, maybe.
Well, no, but it's more that the people that are living in the palaces are often divining and deciding those results. I mean, I still go back to that day, during COVID, when the NHS letter came out about shielding. It went to those that were most excluded, most at risk, and at the time that we were all petrified, if you can remember, and it basically said, stay at home, don't go out, you're really super vulnerable. Here's 15 different websites you can go to. Oh, and if you haven't got anybody that can help you with a website, here's another website. And you kind of go, hello, who has actually decided that this is an acceptable piece of communication? So, I'll get off my soapbox now and go back to.
Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't actually register for a COVID test in the first at least more than 100 days of the COVID pandemic in the UK without an email address. So thank you everyone who has come. I just want to say thank you to Zispina for coming from Australia. It's great, and I love your comments here about scale, what's working, innovate, and micro test, what's not. Fantastic. And also Madupi and Zispina talking about AI hype, creating fear, moving too fast for people, and that's why it's great that we in the UK have got work with Accenture on the AI literacy piece, and so does Good Things Foundation in Australia is working with Telstra and with Microsoft to develop literacy and to support digital literacy on AI and to work with community organisations. So it's fantastic. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. Please do look up the previous episodes of Digital Futures for Good, because I'm sure you will find those videos incredibly inspiring. I do feel a sense of optimism. I think hopefully that's come through the conversation. 100 days isn't a lot, so I think we're not scoring the exam papers quite yet, but we are talking. The government is listening. They are listening to a number of different people, and absolutely, Anne, we are always talking about the grassroots as being absolutely essential to any solution. So thank you so much for coming. All of the previous episodes are available on YouTube, and the next episode will be with Alan Milburn. Thank you so much. Bye for now.